This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Simone Sweeney. I'm an executive and leadership coach following a 25-year career leading high-performing teams in companies like Apple and the Lego Group. In this new series, I'm delighted to introduce you to experts, coaches, and thought leaders as we make the case for why the future of great leadership is human. Discover how coaches are working to bring about a seismic change in how we define an incredible leader. We'll also consider the role of people versus technology and discuss why it's more important than ever to harness skills like self-awareness, communication, and gratitude, amongst others. In this series, our aim is to explore the very human capabilities and behaviors that will inspire a revolution in leadership and change the face of business. Today on the podcast, I'm delighted to welcome Bernadette Thomas as we talk about how a human-centered leader needs to be focused on well-being. I'm so excited to have Bernadette talk to us today because of the great work that she does in the space of work and well-being. She is a mentor to me and a great friend. So Bernadette, massive welcome to today's episode.
Thank you so much, Simone, for having me today. I am really excited to talk to you about all the work that I've been doing, both with Rosby Consulting, which I do a lot of coaching. I work with organizations to help them to be more effective and help their people to really understand their why at work and how that they can bring their best selves to the workplace, creating high-performing teams and just really aligning culture and behaviors with the strategy of an organization. And I also run and have developed a menopause app for women as they go through this transition of perimenopause, pre-menopause and post-menopause. And it is serving women across the world to understand and educate themselves on their menopause journey.
So we're going to be looking at what it takes to be a well worker in essence. And as we look throughout the series at what it takes to be a more human leader, of course, looking after yourself is a key component of ensuring that you're bringing your best to work and that you're also supporting the best in the people that you work with. So thinking about leadership today, what qualities or behaviors does a leader need to succeed and to be happy and thrive these days?
Now, there's quite a few things. One of the things I would recommend is looking at yourself and how do you present yourself at work. So what are the things that you're doing to role model to others? Things like being empathetic, being a compassionate leader, being your authentic self. And also, as I said about role modeling what you do to look after yourself. So whether that is making sure you switch off at certain times or having your lunch break or taking a walk and having walking meetings. What are you doing on the weekends to make sure that you're recovering and you're resting? And just talking about those sorts of things with your team and just knowing when to put up a boundary and being able to say, this is how I behave, this is what works for me, and encouraging your team to do the same thing.
I love how you speak to that as being a role model for not just leadership, but for that kind of positive, well-being focused behavior. And that makes me curious, is well-being and leadership, are those mindsets or are those kind of fundamental behaviors that are anchors that every leader should be looking to kind of cultivate?
Oh, good question. I think they're quite a bit of both. So in terms of a mindset, you have to have the attitude that I am going to look after myself. So it's important for me to be at my best in order to have a high-performing team and to encourage high performance across my team. But there's also a sense of anchoring where this is really important for me to present who I want to be. And we know that, you can have a resilience program and you can have things to help with stress, etc. in the workplace. But what are you doing personally to make sure that either you're getting a really good night's sleep or what are those habits that you're creating for yourself in order to be at your best? And so I think it is very much a combination of your mindset and being open to explore other avenues to create healthy habits. And then also that anchoring of what makes me feel good. So not necessarily going for a run every morning as a marathon runner. It could just be going for a walk, or it could be doing some strength-based exercise, or it could be having a mindful minute during the day, whatever it is for you. making that work for you personally.
So it's a mindset, but also it's behavior that we need to cultivate.
Yes.
As well as maybe using the term of mindful, being mindful towards what that well-being looks like for you as the individual. And I imagine consequently for the team, this isn't a one size fits all, and likely not a one state fits every state situation as our own life situation evolves and develops over time.
You just made me think that's also really connected with being very empathetic. So having that higher sense of awareness of what might work for me doesn't always work for another person. I'm sure we've all got examples of leaders who have told us what they think is brilliant and what's great, and this is what works for me, so you should all go and do this, and we should all get involved in running this marathon or going for this really long bike ride or whatever it might be. That doesn't work for everybody. That in itself might create more stress for some people. So just having that really strong awareness of self and regulating your own thought processes to think what might work for my team members is about being more curious with them and getting, as a leader, being more of a coach with your team members to think about, well, what's going to work for you? So you just made me think of that when you said that, actually.
I'm smiling, and obviously with the podcast that may not come across, but many years ago, I had a leader suggested as a team building activity that we run the London Marathon. Oh. And as a non-runner, it was a hard no for me. Happy to sponsor and cheer on. But while the intent was good, the activity was not suitable for probably 85% of the team. So that kind of empathy and also that self-awareness as to what works for one may not work for others is, I think, a critical thing for us to look at through this whole series, but obviously in this episode, particularly as we focus on well-being. And that, of course, leads really well and relevantly into how important emotional intelligence is in a leader. And this obviously is a critical topic for us in a human-centered leadership podcast. But I'd love to learn a little bit more about how you see emotional intelligence playing a role for leaders, both those who are building their skills or those who already have a strong leadership foundation that they're working within.
I think it's fair to say that any good leader has a strong sense of emotional intelligence, and it's certainly not something that we're all born with, but something that we can develop and grow. But it does take a lot of work. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's crucial for all leaders to build, and not just stop building, but it's an evolution. We're constantly working on our emotional intelligence because I think the world is evolving so much around understanding others, being more inclusive and diverse, that as a leader, we need to constantly be thinking, how might that impact on another person? How might my behavior or how might someone else's behavior be impacting on my team members? What do I do about that? So having that really strong sense of self-awareness, but also understanding others and the impact of behaviors on other people. There's a definite correlation between regulation and well-being, and just knowing that if you are really tired, you're less likely to be able to regulate. So our emotional sense is affected if we are not energized or, at our best from a rest perspective. There's a really strong correlation between emotional intelligence and our sense of well-being.
I really love how you position the ability to regulate your emotions and consequently your behavior, and how that is influenced by different factors. So, for example, being tired, I imagine being very stressed. You and I both come from a corporate background before we moved to coaching, and I'm sure have untold stories of bad behavior or people struggling within this space. And obviously one of the big culprits of influencing poor emotional intelligence is pressure, which is often related to stress. So what type of a role does stress play in influencing how people are showing up at work, particularly those who are leading a team?
I've got so many things that I want to talk about on this topic. I'm thinking a lot about cortisol, so as a hormone and something that is released when we feel really stressed. So there is an element of understanding what you need to personally do. And coming back to what we were talking about before, as a personal element of having opportunity to release some of that cortisol from your body. And so that could be anything from nutrition to exercise to sleep to mindfulness and also to connection. So connecting with your team members, connecting with loved ones, connecting with the environment, they're all really important to support your ability to regulate, but also to reduce your cortisol levels in your body. But those stress is heightened when we are feeling under threat. So if you have a leader who can be intimidating, might have coercive behaviors, those sorts of things are going to raise stress levels in people. When you're feeling really pressured in terms of excessive workload, that's going to raise your cortisol levels and therefore your stress. How you then behave when you are feeling stressed is then typically regulated by either yourself and knowing, okay, I have hit my high stress point and what am I going to do? So your resilience levels, if you are able to have those techniques when you're not feeling stressed, is going to be even better. But if you don't have any sense of where am I at, what is this behavior, how am I feeling, and understanding that self-awareness perspective, so bringing all of the EQ side into it, it's just going to come out and manifest as really poor behaviors. So I think stress is something that I don't think we talk about enough as a full holistic element of how we behave.
I think the stress point and looking at the physiological impact of it on us at work is something that isn't that well explored. And that stress doesn't just look like missed deadlines. It's also relationships, it's behaviors, it's travel, it's managing the sometimes tensions of your work and your personal lives, having to be at a meeting at the same time you need to be at your kids' parent-teacher conversations. That stress comes in many, many different forms. And that kind of self-awareness and that ability to regulate are critical. But as we spend more and more time at work and, after the pandemic, we saw that kind of deeper blending of work and home life. And certainly there were no boundaries for a lot of us at that time. And some of those boundaries have been eroded completely and other new ones have kind of come up in their place depending on how people found the balance that worked for them. But we're spending so much of our time either at work or with work on our minds. So how important is it that we, as both employees and employers, and very specifically as leaders, are focused on well-being now?
So I think just absolutely to your point that you just raised, we spend so much time at work. There is a huge crossover between what's going on in our home life that we bring into work and thinking about being an authentic leader or being an authentic person in the workplace. It's hard not to bring some of those stressors that you feel in your personal life into work and vice versa. And given that the majority of our waking hours during the week are in the workplace, I think that is a critical element that employers need to be mindful of and need to be aware of and have things in place to support people's well-being, overall well-being, and to ensure that stress is reduced for people. And I love what you said, Simone, as well. It might not just be excessive workload, but so much is, and I come back to those points around connection. So we know through the Gallup surveys that the number one correlation between engagement at work is whether or not you have a best friend in the workplace. And that says something. It really reduces our limbic system and it creates that serotonin in our body and makes us feel happy when we see a friend. If you feel supported in the workplace, you feel like you're able to breathe a little bit more. You might have that person who observes you, and this is where it comes into not just it's an employer responsibility, it's an everybody responsibility. If you see someone who's heightened, who looks like they're breathing from their chest, that is stress. If you see someone who is appearing like they're isolated, they could be feeling really stressed and not able to talk about it. So, there's lots of things that correlate so heavily with employer, employee, and self-responsibility for addressing stress.
I think it's fantastic how you shared some of the signs of stress that will help leaders to recognize that in their people and then to adjust. And that role of a friend, you often hear in the UK, for example, the terms like work husband or work wife, which can have different connotations, or a work bestie.
Yeah.
Those are grounding individuals that almost are blurring the lines between the colleague that you see at work and there's no other connection. And again, that is often a really good resource. And in times of change, when you have a new leader or the team is being restructured, those relationships can be changed. They can be fundamentally altered or removed if someone is to leave, either leave the team or leave the business or to relocate abroad. So I'd love to explore this one a little bit more because it's probably something a lot of us don't think about, that importance of that buddy to help you through. And at risk of this being how to make friends at work, there are a lot of companies that have a strong community or social calendar or program or even kind of activity base that the employees have created informally. How important are activities or programs like that that allow people to build relationships and find those connections that will help them thrive in the workplace?
Oh, they're so important. And there's a lot of work that's being done, particularly through the NHS in the UK for social prescribing, which is amazing. And people have shown recovery rates from illnesses quite often caused by stress. I mean, stress can impact on so many ways, bodies physically and mentally, but having those communities, having a sense of belonging is critical. I just think if we think about the Maslow hierarchy of needs, as an example, there's a lot of people who are saying that we all have a need to be loved. That social connection, that sense of belonging is a fundamental need as a human being. So being very human-centered about it is fundamental for all of us to feel like we belong, to have those connections. So whether that be through a community group in the workplace or like a hobby group or a social group, whatever it might be at work, it's also just generally in your team. Nobody wants to feel socially excluded from anything. And particularly coming back to those points that you mentioned about COVID, when people are working remotely or in a hybrid way, just being mindful that they might feel like they're not part of the team anymore. They're not part of that gang. And the stress that that might be causing on those people, it's a psychosocial hazard. I think we need to be far more aware of what the outcome of those sorts of things might be to individuals and also to the organization as a whole. But you also made me think about us as coaches and the challenge that so many of us have because we set up as coaches because it's something we really, truly believe in. And hopefully we're all very good at it too. But it can be really lonely. It can feel really isolating as a coach when you are constantly trying to do everything yourself, especially for people like us who have been in corporates where you've had that infrastructure around you to then have to build your own architecture of a business. And I feel like that for me, when I was setting up as a coach, having my little posse, my little coaching posse was so important. I think it's underestimated and it's something that a lot of new coaches may not be thinking about, but I would highly urge people or small business owners to join some networks, to find your people who are not necessarily in competition with you. They might be, but we all have a role to play and we all have a place in this world. So the more support we can give each other, the better.
It's fantastic that you brought that in because it is something that is easy to let slide when you're focused on building a business and when you're in a career change. I was very fortunate to work for companies like Apple and the Lego Group where culture and community was a huge part of the business. It was almost far more than culture. It was just the way of being. And when I left and was working on my own, that was a very significant transition for me because I was no longer around people. And for those who are self-employed, whether it's as a coach or otherwise, as you said, cultivating that's really important and is possibly the most consistent theme of the previous series I did, which was exploring an entry into coaching. So it's called Getting Started as a Coach. And every guest I spoke to talked about the importance of building that community. And groups like the Association for Coaching have lots of great resources like the co-coaching forums and seminars and workshops. But it's an important thing for us to kind of be mindful of cultivating because also when you're under stress, if you're struggling with anxiety and depression, there is also that tendency to withdraw and to be more inwardly focused, or those who are struggling through grief or trauma. I mean, there's so many situations where people kind of naturally will pull back because that's what they feel they need to do. but that community connection is really important to our well-being. So it's super that we've touched on that today. So thanks for calling that out.
Pleasure.
And to that point, I wonder how effective someone can be as a leader if they're struggling with their own well-being. How do you focus on yourself to lead and then create the room for others too? Because it's a multi-layered task.
Yeah. And I think just as I mentioned about building your own business, it can be quite lonely. I think sometimes being a leader can be quite lonely. And so this is where creating your own support network is important. It's also important to know when to ask for help. So many of us struggle with that asking for help. Is there someone that you have around you, that somebody who is there for you, that is your check-in person, who you have maybe a mentor, and it could be internally or it could be externally, but having someone who you talk to and say, these are some of the things that I notice about myself, that when I do feel stressed, these might be some of my behaviors. Or it could be just very, very simple daily, what am I doing for myself to give myself energy? Or what am I doing for myself to be my best self today? And no matter how bad you feel or how stressed you're feeling, if there's just one tiny thing that you can do for yourself in that day, that is what's going to help. I know it's really hard if you're in the depths of, where do I go for help? I feel terrible. Maybe you don't even recognize how bad you're feeling. But hopefully, if you are a good leader that has that emotional intelligence and that is self-aware enough, what is that just one thing each day that you can ask yourself, what do I need today? What do I need to do for myself today? And whether that be going for a coffee with a friend, or whether that be giving someone a call, or just going and sitting in the sunshine, whatever it is, it doesn't have to be big. Just one small thing. Sometimes even for me, I personally know if I can go to bed 10 minutes earlier, what will that give me? And just really almost self-coaching and getting into that mindset of, what do I need for me today?
Those are great reflection points and guides for us to think about our well-being. And you spoke to that as kind of self-coaching. How can a coach help someone to be more focused on their well-being?
Good question. There are a number of things that I would personally be asking any of my coaches. And I mentioned before, I don't think that there's a clear line between our work selves and our home selves. And generally speaking, the question that I would be asking is, how do you want to be feeling? If you think about yourself in 6 months' time and you're setting your goals for our coaching engagement, how do you want to be feeling in 6 months' time? And for you to feel like that, what needs to happen? And I would always make sure that there's some sort of well-being goal in my coaching engagements, because that well-being goal is the one thing that is going to help the individual, no matter what, to get up each morning and to keep going. And making sure that as coaches, it's not something that we're pushing our coaches that is totally unachievable, but also that's so big that it's scary. If you think about running a marathon, you wouldn't start by starting running necessarily. You might start by going and getting some trainers. You might start by getting something to wear to feel comfortable in to start running. You might then start by walking, but you're not necessarily going to start by running 10Ks in the next week. And so it's really thinking about those small actionable steps that can be taken each day that feel like it's achievable, it's doable. And one of the really great questions is, what can you achieve today? So, okay, you might not be able to go for a 10-minute walk. What can you do? Can you do 2 minutes? And really breaking it down. And by breaking it down, it becomes something that is achievable. And therefore, your brain gets that little reward center and you feel good about yourself for achieving something. So it's making sure that they're achievable, small, actionable tasks each day or each week that is going to help your coachee.
I think that point of accessible goals is so important. I'm reading a great book on building resilience. It's a book by Karen Rivich, and it's kind of grounded in the positive psychology movement. And we'll put it in the show notes, along with the other things that we're kind of speaking about for reference. But one of the key points in that is to build your resilience. One of the strongest tools is that self-efficacy. So looking at achievable goals that build up that sense of confidence and positive reflection on, well, I've achieved this, I can strive to achieve that next. So I think that your analogy of going from the couch to effectively to the marathon and taking those small steps, but keeping those achievable goals in mind and focusing there is really important. That is a very personal journey. And one of the things I wonder, which is, almost a huge philosophical question for our employees, whose responsibility is it to promote well-being in the individual at work? Is it the organization? Is it the individual? Is it a coach or a trainer working with that? Is it everyone's? Do you have any perspectives on that?
I would say it's everyone's. I think an employer is responsible for having the accessibility for people to access information. Maybe it's awareness education sessions. So having the ability to take part in whether it be connection or nutrition. I think that there's a really strong responsibility from employers to not push and not put too much pressure on people to have excessive workloads, to be working all hours of the day, to gone are the days where we have all these big nights out and then be expected to be at our best the next day. And I think that is an employer responsibility. There's a duty of care there. But as an individual, it is our responsibility to also say no. It's our responsibility to look after ourselves. It's our responsibility to create our own healthy habits and go to bed early or eat healthily or get some exercise. That is our personal responsibility. Absolutely. It might be though that you need support to do that. And with support, that is where it comes into friends, family, it comes into work colleagues. If you are trying to give up smoking, for example, hanging around people who smoke is going to be even more challenging. So that is a personal responsibility to find those people who are not smoking and start spending more time with them. But it's also the responsibility of you to say, this is what I'm doing, and maybe tell people I need some help with this. I'm looking for someone to support me with it. Again, if you're someone who wants to run a marathon, and I'm just using that because it's, a very physical, tangible example. If you then live with someone who just wants to sit on the sofa all day long and eat crisps or something, that's not going to be helpful. So, there is an element of sharing what your goals are as well and sharing with other people so that they know. And in a way, that holds you more to account once you've shared it aloud.
Absolutely. And it also helps people to recognize more about what's going on, the opportunities for support, the tensions or difficulties you might be facing. So that communication is an important part of it.
Absolutely. Simone, would it be okay if I make just a couple of points though?
Of course.
One is, I think it's really important for both us as coaches, but also as human beings to not be judgmental. So show ourselves kindness and be self-compassionate. So if for whatever reason you are feeling not great or you're feeling very stressed, it is about not judging yourself for that. That is a mindset in terms of, okay, I might feel like rubbish, but what can I do to make myself feel better? And, I still haven't got out of bed and I still haven't gone on that run that I said I was going to go on. How can we shift that self-talk to be more compassionate? And I think that again is for us as coaches to recognize in ourselves, but to help our coachees to be more aware of what is that self-narrative and how can we flip that to be more self-compassionate and non-judgmental of ourselves.
Great. The compassion starts with yourself, but then that awareness and focus on compassion hopefully translates into greater awareness of the need for compassion in others.
Absolutely.
That actually leads really well to something I was curious to get your perspective on, and that is the impact of mental health trauma or more general kind of emotional struggles that may be situational, a divorce or a bereavement, or a change in circumstances, either at work or at home. All of these things, of course, play out at work as well. We don't just leave our emotional selves at the office door, whether you're starting at 7 a.m. or 9 a.m. or working shifts, however that work looks for you. How can leaders support their people who might be experiencing something difficult, whether it's their mental health or a situation that is causing upset and is at best a distraction and at worst a significant or almost catastrophic scenario that means they're trying to just keep their head above water?
There's quite a few things here. It's really hard as a leader to know exactly what's going on for everyone. So I think point number one is you're not always going to spot it. People mask. And if we think about trauma responses, they could be from anything. And certainly, I've been doing some work in Australia recently. They have a really, really big sense of trauma-informed responses at the workplace and being more aware. And this could go from anything around our life experience, so our background and our cultural experience and how we've been brought up and raised, right through to women's experiences in the workplace and some of the discrimination that women have faced in the workplace. So there's lots of things that come through with trauma. It could be other more personal trauma around grief, bereavement, physical trauma that people have suffered. So there's lots of things. And as a leader, you're not going to know all of those things. And it may never have been an issue until a certain trigger. So as a leader, that's going to be very, very hard to spot. What I would say is, as a leader, one of our main roles is to understand our people and to see people as humans and to see them as individuals and understand some of the things that are going on in their lives. So having more open conversations and having time to get to know your team is crucial, because then at least you understand the baseline and you might understand what's going on, and your team member will be far more open to talk to you if they feel that they have a rapport and that they trust you. So I think that's number one, is even from day one, if you don't know anyone in your team, the thing that I would highly recommend is getting to know people in your team. That it's invaluable. It's going to create high performance, that engagement, all those things, because people will feel connected to you. And then secondly, it is about having those open conversations. You don't look like yourself today. Is everything okay? Or is there anything you want to talk about? No, my door's always open. So that kind of starts the conversation, because what you don't want to do is go in full force with, well, you look like crap today. What's going on? Or you're really not up to form today. Talk to me about what's going on. I think if you have a far more human-centered approach in terms of, I recognize that things might not be great for you at the moment. Is there anything you wanted to talk about? Or what support can I offer for you? Do you know where to go to get some help with things? How can I lead you in the right direction? Or all those sorts of things. Or whether it be that they've got a friend at work and you have a quiet word with that friend and say, look, I'm not sure what's going on. Would you mind having a conversation? And it's just up to you to take the opportunity to really know your people and then to identify and spot those behaviors when they don't look like things are okay. And it might be one day, but it might be over the course of a week that they look like they're not great. And then being able to understand what support they want. So again, we come back to that point we were talking about earlier. Don't just assume that just because something worked for one person is going to work for everybody. Support looks different for everybody. And just because they might have been through the same situation doesn't mean that they want the same level of support. So I think it's just really understanding that we're all different and that having that very strong connection with people is going to be the best thing that you can do.
I really love how you kind of build the foundation for those difficult and supportive conversations in trust and intimacy. And we could have refer back to the trust equation, which many people will be familiar with. So creating that connection so people are willing. And if I think back to my time as a leader, a lot of my day to day was connecting with people, meeting them in their reality. And there are so many times I wish I'd approached it differently, and other times I wish people had approached it differently who are leading me. And as humans, that is the reality of leading in work these days and kind of embracing that human-centric leadership. But it is grounded in trust and compassion and empathy. Back to the points we were making earlier, those are our kind of grounding principles of that. So there's quite a hefty burden on the leader to navigate these things. And obviously, we don't always get it right. What can coaches do to help the people they're working with to feel more confident in their human-centered approach to some of these trickier topics that they might be facing within their team?
I think the best thing that we can do as coaches is giving those leaders the space to talk about it. So really helping them to work through, well, what would you do differently next time? And what else might you do next time in the build up to this? So what are you going to do immediately from today that you have learned from this experience? And just really giving them the space to reflect and to come up with their own thoughts and ideas and to bounce those so that they feel more confident for the next time something happens. And coming back to that self-compassion piece, you could sit there and be hard on yourself, but is that going to help you to learn to do something differently? So that opportunity of space to learn is really important for our coachees. And that I think is our role, is to give them that opportunity to be reflective and to learn for themselves.
I love that. Often as humans, not just leaders or coaches, the best lessons are the hardest lessons, the ones that you experience, which is a bit unfair in a way, but you learn well from that kind of practical experience. And of course, a lot of businesses out there will have a lot of resources that will help with mental health or relating to trauma or lending a hand, whether that's legal aid or flexible working. There's a lot of tools and far too many for us to cover. But I'm curious as to whether you kind of see any gold standard programs or even the basic accessible pieces that a leader should be trying to foster within the organization or team they're working in to help in the case of mental and emotional well-being.
I wouldn't say I've seen a gold standard, if I'm really honest. I think there's certainly some leaders who are great at being able to navigate a system. And so being able to understand where people can go to get support, to get that help that they might need. Everything that we've been talking about today really reflects on, as a leader, there's a lot of pressure on us to understand our people, to be our best, to, have all of these things around us. One of the best things that you can do is role modeling. And by role modeling, you then are empowering people to do the same. And so the more that people feel like they are supported, the more they feel like they can look after their own well-being, the less likely it is there are going to be issues that come up in the first place. So I think there's a huge point around a leader who is open, honest, transparent with their team and communicates very clearly, especially if there are changes going on in an organization and they're able to support their team, but not protect them so much that the team feel like they're invincible or nothing's ever going to happen. So if something very big happened, that they would feel like they're crushed, because that would breach the trust. But I think as leaders, it is important to know where you can go to support your team, but also directing your team so it's not all landing on you as an individual to be supporting your team.
Great. So there it's about creating the space and the support to have the conversations, to create the awareness, to create that kind of not permission, but to enable people to seek help. And then, explore, again, to what we were speaking about earlier, finding the right solution for that individual in that situation, and that balance between the individual seeking help themselves and speaking about it to the degree that they wish to share, but then taking that responsibility and the leader helping to create an environment where that member of their team can spend some time and focus on their well-being.
And in a way, I think recognizing it's not a parent-child relationship. So as a leader, knowing that boundary of, it's not your job to fix the problem. It's not your job to take that individual to get the support they need. What your role is, almost like a coach, is to facilitate for that individual to go and get the help that they need for themselves.
Hopefully, as well, the days of the kind of the boss, the supervisor, that kind of overlord looking over, checking the work, ensuring, the clock is punched and the time at the desk and the tasks are complete are gone. Let's hope those are well and truly behind us. And we talk about that in one of the upcoming episodes, that trust and that space for people to work on their terms and to be able to focus on their well-being and to get things done in a kind of a mature and reflective fashion. I think it's one of the greatest shifts I've seen in my working career.
Yes.
Is often the difference between a boss and a leader, or a manager even and a leader, that trust.
Yes.
We spoke about what businesses can do and those who may or sadly may not be providing the kind of gold standard. But a lot of businesses, particularly in the last 2 to 3 years, have been focused on a topic that I know is very dear to your heart as it is to mine. And that's supporting people in transition. And in this case, women who might be on a perimenopause or menopausal journey. And that is something that's had a lot of media attention in the UK. It's on the rise in places like the US, Canada, Australia. And of course, it only affects one demographic of our workforce. Do initiatives like menopause leave and support, or even dialogue and discussion, play and make a positive impact on people's working lives?
Okay, first of all, I'm really glad you brought this up because there have been so many times where I've wanted to say, whoa, let's just talk about women and the change that they're going through and how that might relate to stress or their own sense of self or that ability to be more self-compassionate, because this is a whole nother ballgame. So thank you for raising it. Yes, it's very dear to my heart. And in answering the question, I think it depends. So menopause leave in itself, and in some countries it's referred to as women's health initiatives, or it could be reproductive initiatives, which makes me very annoyed. I'll go into that in a minute. But in terms of leave, it's not a one size fits all. So I'm not sure that they are that helpful. What is more helpful, and it comes back to this human-centered leadership that we've been talking about, is understanding your people, what might be going on for people. I think the critical element for any organization is to have awareness sessions so that people are aware of what is perimenopause and menopause, what's going on for women at this time. The number of women that I've coached who didn't even realize that they were perimenopausal because it's just not spoken about. And as a woman, it's not something that we necessarily even think about in our 30s or our early 40s. And even the word perimenopause is a relatively new term. So for a lot of women, that can be quite traumatic to think I'm menopausal. That's a different stage of my life. We've all been trained to believe that menopause is this end of your life and you're old and haggard. And it's got a very negative connotation in lots of countries around the world and lots of cultures. Some are more positive than others. However, I do think that organizations taking a very blanket approach to menopause isn't the right thing to do. And you said, yeah, it affects only one part of the workforce. Over 40s women is the fastest growing demographic in the workplace globally. So we're talking about 50% of the population will go through menopause. So although it affects a group of people in your workforce, and whether that be for your organization 5%, 20%, 50%, who knows, but it still affects that many people in your organization. That personally affects, let alone the number of men you might have in your organization whose partners, whose parents, whose siblings, whose aunties, friends are going through menopause, their peers, as a manager, people in your team who might be going through menopause. So the indirect impact is also quite significant. I think that there's a lot to do in this space around understanding what is going on for women at this time. It has a significant impact on all aspects of a woman's life. And we know that no matter how well regulated you are, no matter how well you are generally, that changes in hormones can have a significant impact on you and on your life. So I think there's so much to be said in this space, but my number one point would be that it's not a one size fits all. And my number 2 point is raising awareness within an organization will only help. It will only help an organization to be more supportive of women as they go through this stage of their lives.
I think it's so important, and we cannot overstate that kind of the communication, creating the space for those conversations to happen. And also the awareness. Some people start experiencing symptoms or find themselves in situations without really understanding kind of the greater context. Sometimes it's very hard, particularly for those who might be juggling demands at home, might be under pressure at work, which is often the situation for leaders. Typically, a lot of conventional leaders will be in their midlife period. You might have a lot of demands on your time. There are often overwhelming influences that you just can't see, see the wood for the trees when they're happening. So that awareness is really important. And if I look back to my corporate career, absolutely there are times when probably hormones or the situation at home with the kids and the family definitely influenced how I was as a leader, how I was as an employee, how I was as a colleague and a friend. It's always the benefit of hindsight. But the point you've been making throughout, that kind of awareness, creating opportunities for dialogue and trusted connection, demonstrating compassion and empathy are hugely important to just highlighting that it's okay to experience things and bring those to work and to help people to be the best that they can be. And that focus on well-being is so important. And there are happily so many more resources. I know you're so passionate about this. You've got a great program you're working on in terms of an app called Moxie. We'll share that in the notes. There's lots of books, there's shows, there's articles, and everyone's speaking about menopause, mental health. But that, I think what's key that we're saying throughout this is a leader creating the space to have those conversations and to help the team nurture their well-being is a fundamental act of a human-centered leader.
Absolutely. And it really comes down to that being a compassionate leader, leading with empathy, and being your authentic self as a leader as well. And as coaches, that's something that we can absolutely support all of our coachees to be better at in a non-judgmental space.
Yeah, absolutely. So now just to give people a practical nugget to take away, is there any one thing or series of things that you could recommend to someone listening right now could do today to nudge their self-care routine or their well-being in the right direction?
Yes. I come back to that point that I made that we as coaches could be asking, but it's one that we can ask of ourselves, which is, what can I do today that is going to make me feel great? So what's one thing I'll do today that is going to make me feel great? And it could be that you set yourself a well-being goal. It could be that you set a goal that you say, in 6 months' time, I want to ... And I had a coachee once who said, I want to be wearing my skinny jeans and living it up on the dance floor, which I thought was brilliant because it meant so many things in terms of just having the physical fitness each morning, just getting up and feeling happy and alive. But what do you need to do that? So I don't think there's anything that I can tell everyone that is going to be the key to it all, but it's setting something that is really achievable for you. That is just a small thing that you do. And maybe it is putting a post-it on your mirror or putting it on your screen. That is going to be your little reminder. What am I doing today to make me feel great? And it's your little thing. No one needs to know.
That is a truly, I think, transformative nudge for us, thinking about what's that one thing that I can do today to make myself feel great. And I've recently looked at the work of Dr. John Finn, and he works on the habit mechanic, and he suggests a tiny empowering action every day. And I've been trying to do that along with my accountability partners and my little co-coaching buddies. And some days that is a very transactional thing. I will send out 3 invoices. I will write a LinkedIn post. And other days it's, I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to watch Twilight with my daughter. I'm going to go to the gym. And I think that self-reflection, and I share that, that it doesn't matter what that action is, as long as the intent is going to give you that lift and that boost.
Absolutely.
Your direction there is fantastic. So thank you for sharing that.
Pleasure.
Is there a final kind of pearl of wisdom that you would like to share with every leader who's listening to help them promote well-being in themselves or in others beyond your fantastic, what can I do to feel good today?
I think it is very much about sharing what you do. Not with the expectation that others are going to do exactly the same, but just sharing so that people feel like, and you mentioned it before, Simone, but that they have permission to also do the same. If people feel like you are role modeling as a leader your own well-being, they will feel like they too can look after themselves and they have that permission to do that. So I know for some people it might be every Friday at lunchtime, I go and play tennis, or I work from home on a Monday so I can pick my child up from school because that's really important to me. Or it's I don't drink Monday to Friday so that I'm at my best. Whatever it is going to be personal to you. But sharing that and maybe making the space for your team to also share every now and then what they do to look after themselves will not only show that you're empowering them to go and do the same thing and have a space for well-being, but it's also creating a sense of connection in the team so that people can start to talk about something that is more human and not just work-based.
Fantastic. And finally, where can people learn more about what you do or get in touch with you, Bernadette?
If you are interested in coaching and understanding more around how to be a great leader, then it's Bernadette at rosbyconsulting.com. So rosbyconsulting.com. And if you're interested in our menopause app, which is for women, sorry guys, that is Moxie Menopause. And you'll find that on the Apple App Store and on Google Play.
Fantastic. And we'll include links to your website and also the resources we discussed today, some of the books I mentioned in the show notes. So thank you so much, Bernadette, for bringing your passion for promoting well-being at work to the podcast today. It's a delight to have you.
Oh, thank you so much, Simone. It was great.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organizations, and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, signature programs, member benefits, interviews, podcasts like this one, and a portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership, tools, models, and the latest industry trends to help you develop your coaching expertise.